So, Rue, we're going to talk a little bit about your time at Findhorn and what drew you here, maybe. Can you tell us when you lived here? So, when did you live here, Rue?
I lived at Findhorn from ancient history now, 1974 to 1981. And I came to Findhorn from what was going on in the US at the time, a kind of a time like now in some ways. It's very similar. There was a lot of political activity, a lot of movement for change, and I was part of that. I was a university teacher, and I was part of the women's movement and the anti-war movement and all the stuff that was going on that was trying to change our way of being in the world to a more conscious, loving one. So when I came to Findhorn, it was from all of that, and it was kind of interesting. It was early days for Findhorn, and I learned later, I didn't know this for a long time, but I learned later that the people at the center of Findhorn kind of thought I was a little, I don't know, they kind of had their eye on me. They were afraid that I was going to come burn my bra at the community center, I think.
Oh,
So they were worried. They were worried, start protest marches or something. I had no intention of being like that. I wasn't like that in myself. But anyway, when I came to Findhorn, I had this strong inner sense of call towards spirituality without any practice, without any tradition. I hadn't been a part of, I've been in the political movement. And I've always noticed that I have good instincts and good intuition, but I always found spirituality kind of bewildering because I was never able, Findhorn at that time was kind of the pinnacle of connect with the fairies and connect with your higher self and get guidance from God. And those things were not part of my experience. Somehow I had this strong inner sense of being a spiritual being in the world and the world being magical and alive. But I wasn't good at guided meditations. I wasn't really a meditator, still not really a meditator. So my task was to figure out how to fit in. It felt right to be at Findhorn, but I felt like I wasn't like the image of who you were supposed to be, air quotes, to live at Findhorn. So I did my life there. I did my work. I was a good member of the community. And one of the things that they did then, that I don't know if you still do, but you do various things like this, I'm sure, it was weekly gatherings of guests where there would be a meeting with a community member or two, and guests would ask questions and the community member would talk about what it was like to live at Findhorn. And so I began to be invited to be that person in those groups. I'm not the only one, there were lots. But I had this funny experience once early on in doing that. It was sort of like I was there, it was in the park actually at Findhorn, for those of you who are familiar, in the big meet, or it's not really a big room, but it was a meeting room in the park. And people were asking me questions and I was answering them about life at Findhorn and what it all meant and the spirituality. And I had this funny dissociative experience of a part of me separating and looking back at this person, Rue, talking and thinking, you really sound like you know what you're talking about, but I don't know if you really believe what you're saying. You're good at using the right words, but is this a deep lived truth for you? And then I came back into myself and reorganized. But of course, that was a powerful experience, and it set me to thinking. So if I don't believe all these things that I've gotten good at saying, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't stay. But if I do believe them, I better make a commitment to these concepts and find out and learn how I embody them. And so over time, I stewed with that for a while, and eventually I actually went to the sanctuary where you are sitting, Kathy, right at this moment. The sanctuary when there was nobody there, and I sat there and I said, I think aloud, I can't remember if it was aloud, but definitely inside, kind of, I don't know who's here and I don't know who's listening, and I don't know if any of this is being heard by anybody, but I want you to know that I'm here, I'm present, I'm choosing this. And I didn't get any choirs of angels, and no voice spoke, overtly welcome me. But I left the sanctuary, and just knowing that I had made a commitment on the inside to find out how this worked for me. So if I wasn't going to be somebody who kind of fit the norm of what you're supposed to be like as a spiritual person, how did it work for me? Who was I in the midst of this? And that's kind of been the path of the whole rest of my life. Some, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago is 1974, a long time ago. But I'm still doing that, and still finding that I'm still not a meditator. I still have not seen, I have not had visions. I've not, the kinds of things that I would have normally associated with having a spiritual experience. And at the same time, my training at Findhorn, my life, which was not really training, I took all of the classes in spirituality. Kathy, you said that Michael Linfield is going to be one of your speakers at these gatherings. He, at the time, along with Francois Duquesne, they were teaching kind of classes in esoterics, and I took those classes over and over and over again. Peter Caddy was offering his, I'm forgetting what they were called, but it was about the Foundations of Findhorn, that's what he called it.
Yeah.
Every time he did one of those classes or gave one of those talks, I went to that. And ever since, I have, in wherever I have found myself, I've honored that commitment to find out how it works for me, and to learn how to sense in my body what is truth for me, and find how to find the words that will express what is truth for me, even though it doesn't, like for instance, in guided meditation, I never was any good at guided meditation, because I would go along with what they were saying, but it seemed like somebody else's dream. It wasn't my dream. I wasn't in the center of it. I could make the pretty pictures, but it wasn't arising from the center of me. So that's been my practice, my life, of trying to find what it is that rises from the center of me, and find the words that I can use to share that, and to invite other people. There's got to be other people like me. So invite them into, instead of trying to entrain to something that feels right but is not them, to find their own way of being the truth that they can feel inside.
That's a beautiful description of your journey, actually, Rue. I appreciate it very much. We overlapped in our time here, actually, of when I lived here and you lived here. We lived at Cologne together, if you remember.
That's right.
Yeah, so yes, me too. It was very special.
I was part of the beginning. I wasn't part directly, but the beginning of the game. I remember sitting on Joy Drake's bed with her as she was beginning to invent it,
conceptualize it. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So you were a part of a lot of essential things that have since blossomed, and the work that's been taken out into the world, particularly through your work with David. And one thing that struck me as you were speaking was that, what drove you to Findhorn was some sort of, and then you were perceived as some sort of activist of some sort. And then
I was.
And you were, and now you're a spiritual activist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that, can you talk about that a little bit? What is spiritual activism?
Well, again, for me, I can only speak about what it feels like for me, what I'm aware of. And actually, this is sort of an answer to another one of the questions on your list that you'll probably ask me about in terms of the energy work that I've been involved in.
Mm.
The deepest understanding of that for me comes from the awareness that I can feel, although I didn't know to feel it until um, it was introduced to me, and then I could sense how I felt it. That our presence, how we are in the world, um, how we hold ourselves, how we shape our energy field in the world, affects everything around us. So instead of spirituality for me being listening for guidance, or I've always wished that there was some voice in there that told me what to do. Uh, Never is.
Yes.
Anyway, instead of focusing in that direction, which I couldn't do, I learned how to be aware of my own way of being inside myself and understand how it radiated out from me so that my shape affects the shape of what's around me. And so, really, in its very essence, subtle activism means to me being responsible for finding a way to be that center of calm so that I'm adding calm to the world. And I think that David Spangler said once, from, and in a subtle colleague of his had said, from an inner perspective, from the perspective of the subtle realms, one person being a space of calm, or two people interacting in a connection of love, with a loving connection, has far more power, generative power, to make a change than hundreds, thousands, millions of people marching.
Wow.
And
Just repeat that. Just repeat that, Rue.
I will.
Yes.
The act of one person being a center of calm and radiating that kind of shape around you, or two people or more interacting with love and blessing, like we just did with honoring and love and blessing, that creates a more powerful effect in the inner realms, in the subtle realms, than a march, a protest march for a good cause coming from a good place. But just if you feel into the energy field of that, it's all kind of jaggedy and jangly, and there's a lot of anger. So that those other ways, the individual calm, the loving relationship, is more powerful than a million people march protesting something.
That's incredibly hopeful for us who are coming together in the silent offering. Rue, when you said about shaping ourselves, if I shape myself, can you say a little bit more about just that? Because I'm thinking there's people on our in our dialogue that aren't quite familiar with the term. So what do you mean? How can we shape ourselves?
Yeah, it's an interesting language. It was new to me too. That's not part of our normal way of using the word shaping. But when I thought about it, like if you just experience in yourself, just take a minute, anybody doing this, take a minute to think of a time when there's plenty of opportunities these days, when you're feeling anxious or fearful, and just feel into what that's like inside. If you were going to describe it to somebody else, if you were going to teach somebody else how to feel what you were feeling, if you were going to, something I do in classes a lot is I ask people to feel into, say, a sense of anxiety or fear, and then draw a stick figure, just not art, just a stick figure representing what that feels like. And I'm just even watching my body as I say that, I notice I hunch over, my head comes down, my hands come in, very protective. So imagine drawing a stick figure that looks like that, representing that shape of fear and anxiety. And so then now erase all that, you relax all that, step back from that, whatever you do to get out of that tight, constricted feeling, and imagine into something that you love, maybe being in a landscape that is very dear to you, being with your cat or your dog or with a loved person, an activity that brings you a sense of ease and flow, and just be with that for a minute and notice how your body expresses that. Something I like to do is get a hand motion. See if you can find a hand motion, or imagine that you were dancing, or I don't know, just in some way represent in your body the shape of that feeling, and draw another stick figure and notice how it's different. And often in a class that I teach, I'll do that whole process, starting at the beginning with getting the constricted figure. And then we'll do a meditation, we'll do an energy flow practice of some sort, or a meditation, or some creative act of flowing the energy, returning the energy to flow, and then do that picture at the end. And the image is often, I always ask people to bring colors, because there's often a lot of rainbow light colors or radiant colors at the center. Anyway, so that, coming back to your question, those are shapes that our body takes that represent the experience we're having in the world. And our shape affects everything around us. Like, I'm sure you've had the experience we all have of going into a room and you can just feel there's nervous energy there, or you can feel when somebody angry has been there. David Spangler calls that psychic pollution. And so what we're really learning how to do in subtle activism and in creating a shape is to work to create clear and clean and positive and vibrant, healthy energy flows within ourselves, knowing that has a powerful effect on the world around us.
I love that, Rue. The thought that comes to me is we've learned not to throw our garbage out of our car windows, but yet we're still emotionally tossing things into the environment. You know what
really
I mean?
Good.
Yeah. So it just reminds me of that, and the shaping ourselves around the responsible nature of our impact on our subtle, on the subtle environment. And you also mentioned, sorry, yes.
Well, I was just going to add to that another word that I have adopted because it feels so right is a word that comes from incarnational spirituality, which is what David Spangler calls his work, is the word generative. That human beings are by nature, by incarnation, generative beings. And that's not a word that we use in that way very often. So it invites an exploration of understanding exactly what we're talking about. We have the power and the capacity and the choice to generate the field around us that we want to. We're at the effect of the world, but we're not victim. We can generate and create, and in that way have an effect on the environment around us, and we can clean up our own psychic pollution. I love your image of not tossing the garbage out of the car, which people used to do without even thinking, but still do. And it's the same kind of thing, feeling responsible for the commons. That's another term that I really like, that David has started using more recently. that we live in and are part of a commons. You know, the old term of commons being the shared land. Maybe a community was built around a space that they called the commons, and it was everybody's place, it was everybody's responsibility. And that kind of shared, held sense of love and caring and responsibility for the commons is just at the center of a choice that we can make about who we are in the world.
And within the commons is also the subtle beings.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes,
That's the wholeness. So
That's
every one of our acts and words creates or discreates wholeness. And it's, for me, it's easy to understand using those images.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's powerful too. I mean, it's
we're always talking about creating wholeness and honoring wholeness, but we don't stop to think, how do I do that? How do you create wholeness? And I think that is the way, by becoming aware of and conscious of and intending to love what's around.
And you just said the word diswholeness?
Well, discreating is what I was.
Yes,
I said.
Exactly. But that's also a very powerful realization.
It's true.
To see how and when we do that.
Absolutely, that's what it's about. When you can see, it's not just seeing. I've come to understand that the senses are our communication with the world. The senses bring us information from the world, and our consciousness and our imagination translates into words and images we can understand our connection with the world. So we are always in connection with the world when we're conscious of it and intentional within it. That's what brings, one of the phrases from Findhorn that I learned way back that sounded really good. I knew it was true, but I didn't know what it really meant, was bringing spirit to matter. In some ways, that seemed like dishonoring matter, as if we were the ones that brought spirit to matter. It was a privileging of humans. But when I understand it from this other point of view, that we are all part of the commons of the flow of life, and we all have the privilege and the responsibility and the capacity to bring that into conscious awareness, knowing that every act that we take makes a difference to everything. That to me is creating wholeness.
So in today's world, Rue, do you have any thoughts or feelings about the impact of Findhorn or the place of Findhorn?
You mean what Findhorn is doing now?
Yes, kind of what do you sense Findhorn's contribution to the planet is? Not that I know. Yeah. Okay, tell us, Rue.
Yeah, 5 words or less.
Yes.
Well, the bottom line answer is I don't know. But in my experience, having been around a pretty long time by now, I can see that Findhorn let me just put it, it's like the earth manifested this place in the remote north of Scotland to be a place kind of out of a lot of the influence of the rest of the world, to be a place where something new, a new seed could be planted, a seed of being human, a seed of being Gaian, place where a seed could be planted in a relatively protected environment and grow and blossom and bloom, which of course is the history of Findhorn, big blossoming and blooming, and grow and bloom and blossom people too, which was a term or a concept that was current when I was living there. But now looking back on, that was 50 years ago that I first, amazing.
Totally.
But to see how the concepts that were seeded and grew and blossomed at Findhorn, and how those blossoms, to carry on with the metaphor, have matured and the seeds have floated off into the wind around the rest of the world through the material realm, through the subtle realms. It's been a profound influence on the way that we think and the language that we use and the consciousness that we have about who we are and why we are. And it's not the only place that's done this. And there are places all over, but it's like each of us, it created a shape that has changed life.
Thank you, Rue. Thank you,
Kathy.
I've enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be part of it.
And for those of you who've joined us, thank you very much for being with us. You'll see that there is more information for how to connect with the foundation, and at some near time we'll begin to offer programs on site again once the environment allows that. And in the meantime, there are online classes and meditations, and I hope that you find your way to some of those if you're drawn. And I believe, Rue, you also have a way to be contacted. Do you want to mention that?
What I would mention is not so much contacting me. I mean, if somebody wanted to, they could personally, but more to be aware of the partnership between the Findhorn Foundation work and the Lorian Association work that I'm actively part of, to go to LorianAssociation.com and to see the classes that we offer, all of which emerged from Findhorn in one way or another, because the people who started Lorian got their came together spiritual, that's not what I'm wanting to say, came together. The garden was started there. The garden was started at Findhorn, and Lorian is one of the powerful seeds that has sprouted from what was begun at Findhorn. So yeah, LorianAssociation.org. If somebody wanted to contact me specifically, my email through Lorian is Rue, R-U-E-H, just Rue-H @Lorian.org.
Thank you, Rue. Thank you
Yes.
very much. And thank you everyone again for joining us. And please look for the next time that we have a special guest, which will be actually Tim Hass, Rue's husband, spiritual partner.
We met at Findhorn, married at Findhorn,
married.
First daughter was born there.
First daughter here. Yes, exactly. During our time at Culern.
That's right.
Yeah, so we take it right back to the beginning.
I know.
So again, thank you, Rue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy, and everybody there. Findhorn is deep in my heart, deep in my soul, and I'm so honored and glad, grateful to be doing this now.
Thank you.